Aloha! Welcome back to Tenure, a game menu, where we break down how you can get tenure and explore topics loosely related to tenure. My name is Omni, a Chinese historian who works at the University of Texas at Dallas. Today, I am joined by Dr. Brian DeMare. Dr. DeMare is professor of history at Tulane University. He has traveled a long road to New Orleans. Growing up in Hawaii, Dr. DeMare attended the same school as Barack Obama and Sun Yat-sen on the island of Oahu. He did his undergraduate work at Occidental, a small liberal arts college in Los Angeles, where he first found a passion for studying Chinese history, and that is also where he decided that he wanted to become a college professor. Dr. DeMare did his graduate work at UCLA and spent a full 5 years living in Beijing, where he met his future wife. He considers himself very fortunate to get a tenure-track job in 2009, just as the economy was tanking, and has been teaching at Tulane ever since. What got me interested in Dr. DeMare's story is that he published 3 books in less than 10 years. He not only continued to write and publish after tenure, and even being promoted to full professor, but he published faster and faster. According to him, the secret is that you have to have an ego, and you have to believe that if you don't write this book, no one else will, and the field of Chinese history is going to suffer. Another tip is that try to adjust the scope of the book and always keep the audience in mind, since writing in general is a lonely journey. Another key point I learned from the conversation with Dr. DeMare is that for the academic career, it gets better as time goes by. Before getting tenure, he spent every weekend to work at his office, even missed the moment when his son took the first step. But now, he is excited to write his next book, as well as meeting and advising junior scholars, and he finds joy in teaching an intellectually stimulating seminar. Service is increasingly challenging, but he has more freedom to step down from the administrative work. For those of us who are listening, you may have been on the job market for several years, trying to secure a more permanent position, when your college classmates earning so much more than you do, and probably start buying their first houses. Or you may be on the tenure track, trying very hard to balance teaching, writing, and family responsibilities. It takes so much time, and it feels it never ends. It will get better, since the freedom and autonomy come later during the academic career. You may just have to believe it, otherwise it's challenging to make it through the initial hardship. After this episode, we have come to the end of Season 1. I hope you learned something useful about the tenure process. We will explore more topics related to tenure and academic life in the upcoming seasons. But for now, how to continue to write and publish after tenure, and how does the academic career get better as time goes by? Let's listen in. Good morning, Dr. DeMare. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your time being here today. I'm a big fan of your books about the history of PRC, and there were so many things I would like to talk with you about Chinese history and also our common interest in Hawaii. Besides a researcher, you are also a very interesting speaker and a great storyteller. There are so many things I would like to ask you, but today we're going to focus on academic life and writing. For the audience that who are not familiar with you, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as I think you just hinted at, I grew up in Hawaii, and this is one of the foundational facts of my life. It's had a profound influence on my personality and outlook. Hawaii is a wonderful place to grow up. It's literally paradise, but it's also a challenging place to grow up. It's not a very academic place. It's not a place that really emphasizes education. Sometimes with huge and negative impacts on the lives of certain people like me. I started out in public school, and my early education was very uneven. I've mostly recovered, but I still have a phobia surrounding math that I think I'll never shake. But that's kind of my origin story, if you will.
So since the show is about tenure, um, so let's talk beyond Hawaii. So what are the tenure requirements for tenure and promotion, like at your current institution in Tulane?
So I'm just now finishing a 3-year term as department chair. So this is something that I can certainly talk about. One thing I should note about my time at Tulane is that I started off as a visiting assistant professor and then segued into the tenure track stream. So I've seen this kind of the department from all angles. And now part of my job as chair is to explain to people what our requirements are. And I'm happy to say our requirements are very clear and straightforward and also very achievable for the vast majority of people who come into our departments, especially these days. People who are listening to this podcast will probably know how competitive the academic job market is right now. So to get hired now, you usually already have multiple publications and teaching experience and all these things, where even me coming in 2009, did not have those. So, but roughly our expectations are divided between service, teaching, and research. Of the three, service is the least important. We try to shield our junior faculty from heavy service burdens. We don't want them to be overwhelmed by service so that distracts from their teaching or research. And we actually have it in our bylaws that you're not supposed to have any service the first year. That said, people have gotten service their first year. Things happen, mistakes are made. But in general, when as a junior faculty, your service is limited and should only be departmental service. It's after you get tenure that you take on larger roles like director of undergraduate or graduate studies, or God forbid, chairing a search, right? Those are things we don't want our junior faculty to do. For teaching, we have a 2-2 teaching load. At Tulane, we have a very hands-off approach to teaching, in that when the Department of History hires you, the assumption is that we hired you because you are a good teacher. And we give you the freedom to teach the classes that you want. And we don't really look over your shoulder in terms of kind of observing classes or really stepping in. Now, junior faculty are encouraged to reach out to senior faculty to sit in on their class and give them feedback. But in terms of the tenure process, it's actually not until you go up for third year review, and then again when you go up for tenure, that you have someone sit in your classroom to write a report. So like I said, it's a 2-2 teaching load. We have a lot of freedom in what we teach. So for myself, for example, I do teach all of Chinese history, and I teach seminars on other topics in East Asian history. But if I wanted to, really, like for example, not teach pre-modern Chinese history and only teach modern history, I probably could figure out a way to do that. And my colleagues in general would be fine with that. So we're not really kind of micromanaging each other's teaching. As long as your evaluations are good and you're a decent teacher, that's not going to pose too much of a problem for your tenure file. For tenure, really, it comes down to research. That's what the trickiest thing is. It's the thing that you can't fudge, you can't fake. And we have pretty clear expectations about getting a couple of articles out by third year review. And for your tenure, you must have a book published with a good quality academic press. And for us, again, the rules are clear. And that's what I like. As someone who teaches Chinese history and teaches legalism, Lord Shanyang, Han Feizi, big fan of clear rules that everyone is held accountable to. And that's what we have. So your book needs to be in proofs, at least. It has to be with the press in its final form when you go up for tenure. You can't say, well, we still have another round of revisions, or, well, I'm sending it out. No, it has to be accepted and in proofs. And beyond that, more is always good. I might talk about this a bit later, but at Tulane, like at any academic institution, if you ask someone, a senior faculty, well, have I done enough? The answer is almost certainly going to be, you could do more. So there's always, yes, it's better to have more articles and progress to your next book. But in terms of what you have to absolutely have, it's very clear that when you go for tenure at Tulane in the history department, you need a book, and it's got to be with a good press. And if you don't have it, then it's not going to work out for you.
Definitely, the book it is the trickiest aspect of tenure process, also the most challenging one, as you said. And many of our previous guest speakers all resonated with this point. So, but for your own experience and your own trajectory, you are a very productive writer and author. So you definitely done above and beyond. So you got your PhD at UCLA in 2007, and you published your first book with Cambridge, a very good academic press, as you said, in 2017 about Mao's Cultural Army. And then you wrote a second book in 2019, Land Wars with Stanford, and your third book just after 3 years. And Tiger, Tyrants, Bandit, and Businessmen also with Stanford. So 10 years after dissertation, first book, and 2 years, second book, and 3 years, the third book. So not only you continue to publish after tenure, but you seem to do it faster and faster. So how did you do it? How did you get that done?
So first, I need to correct you slightly. So the first book was 2050. So, but you're generally correct that there was a longer stretch of time in between my dissertation and my first book, and the second and third book came out faster. And I would attribute this to a few things. The first is that my dissertation at UCLA was on land reform, political culture, and I can now admit this. It's not a great dissertation. It's more of a collection of essays, and there wasn't a clear path from the dissertation. And I actually asked Lynn Hunt, who's a very talented historian of modern France, who was on my committee, to kind of look at my dissertation and to give me advice about which way to go. And she correctly identified the drama troupe aspect of that as the most interesting. But what that meant is that I kind of had to go back to the drawing board for that first. So that's why it took the longest. That's why I had some difficulty in my tenure process, especially at the start. When I went up for third year review, I got a note from my then chair who said, "We're worried about." It was after my first year at Tulane on the tenure track. They wrote me a note saying, "We're worried about your progress towards third year review," because I was really kind of starting from scratch, as opposed to the standard path, which is to come in and revise your dissertation. So it took a lot of work, but I was able to get Mao's Cultural Army published. Why did the other two books come out relatively quick? For the second book, Land Wars, partly was I was returning to my dissertation topic, and the secret to that was, and this is something I've talked about before, is finding the right scope. So I wanted to write a book about land reform, which is when the communists came to your village and implemented the revolution. It's something that happened in approximately 1 million different villages. So to write a book about that is very challenging. And I'd actually, for a moment, given up hope. Just was like, someone else can write that book. But then I figured out a way to approach it that made it possible, that I could focus on the narratives that have been spun around land reform and use that as my entry point. So I didn't need to talk about land reform in 1 million villages. I had to talk about really the ideas and narratives and methods that were used across the campaigns. So it really simplified things. Let me also note that at that time, I was well aware that there was no English language book on land reform, and I wanted to write one. So this is something that might come up a little bit later, but there was a little bit of ego in that I felt that this was something that I could do. and that would be very unique to me, and it would also be a great contribution to my field. For Tiger, Tyrant, Bandit, Businessman, this one also came out relatively fast, and to this one, I'll credit maybe three things. One is that I was working off a very limited source base. I only had access to four archival files related to these legal cases in rural China in the early 1950s. So there was a real limit of the sources, and so there was only so much I could do with them. So that kind of limited the scope of the project. I also had great help from student research assistants. So this is something that I try to emphasize to junior faculty, especially if you're at like me and you're not at a top 10 university, that our students are a tremendous resource. Now, many of our students are not reliable and should not be used at any academic project. But if you look carefully, you will find some amazing, brilliant, dedicated students. And I had a bunch of them. In this case specifically, I had some really tremendous students from the PRC who were not the typical business school, finance, accounting students. They were liberal arts majors. They were passionate about history and literature and linguistics, and they were a tremendous help as well. But I also have to note that I wrote this during COVID lockdown, and that did a number of things for me. Number one is that my son being homeschooled, or he was doing remote schooling, so I didn't have to drive him anywhere, and that added about 2 hours to my day. I had just so much free time, or extra time, I should say, because I wasn't driving him around. But also, what I say to people about COVID is that however you survive the lockdown, good for you. We all had our own demons and our own issues that we need to get through. For me, it was a very dark time. It was very troubling. And I found great comfort in throwing myself into this project. Was it a sound choice from a mental health perspective? I don't know, but that's what it took. And so I would, turn off the TV, turn off the news, and just go and read through archival documents. And that was very comforting for me at that time. So those were kind of the individual processes on those three books.
That's fascinating. Especially, it is very unique to hear about how you incorporate undergraduate researchers into the project. Speaking of institutional supports, could you talk a little bit more about the type of supports that you receive at the institution and externally for the three book projects that you developed so far?
So I'll start by noting that I've had almost zero luck with any external funding. If you name any big nationwide fellowship, I've applied for it and I've been rejected. And I have all of the rejection emails to prove it. So I've had very little luck in that regard. Luckily for me, while I'm about to say some nice things about Tulane, but before I do, I must note that it's a school with a lot of problems as well. And I often dream about being someplace else. That said, they have done a great job of providing me enough funding to make all of these books possible. And as outgoing chair, this is something I've said to job search candidates when they sit in my office, is that there is funding. So what about me? So I got a research startup package. I think it was $5,000. It wasn't a tremendous amount of money. In 2014, the School of Liberal Arts here at Tulane awarded me a Young Mellon professorship, which was $5,000 a year until I got tenure. In my case, that was 2 years of funding. We have conference travel money. It started off as $1,000 a year. Now it's up to 1.5. I'll note too that we've gotten more freedom in how we spend that money. We have a new-ish dean who came about 6 years ago. And one of the things that he did that I really appreciate was the conference travel money used to be you could only spend it for conference travel. But now, and this is another thing that's probably due to COVID, if there's a given year where you don't go to a conference, well, you can use that money to go on a research trip. I've also had time off. So I had a fourth year leave after passing my third year review. I had a tenure leave after I got tenure. I also actually before that I had a parental leave, and this is something that I need to be fully, uh, you know, gracious for. Is that as when my wife gave birth to our son, I had a semester off, and I want to emphasize this. I did do a lot of diaper changing and pushing the stroller around, and I'm people will generally say I'm a good baba, I'm a good father, but I also did some work during that parental leave, and it has been said. I don't have the numbers to back it up, but if you're a male academic and you get parental leave, you really should get tenure. And so that's what happened to me. So I want to be very upfront and honest about that. Again, I need to emphasize I deserve the parental leave. I was a good parent, but it was also beneficial for my tenure clock. And beyond that, Tulane does have internal funding that you apply for. It's never huge amounts. It's usually somewhere at the low end, maybe you might get $1,000 to go to a conference. If it's research we're talking about, maybe 3,000. At the high end, very, very top would be 10,000. And I've picked up a couple of these internal grants over the years, and it's been enough. And also add that one of the benefits of doing research in China is that, at least for me, it's expensive to get there. But once you're there, it's not the most expensive place in the world, especially if you have some inside connections so that you don't have to stay at the Hilton.
Fascinating. Um, so you talk about it is very expensive to get to China and do your field work. But I also understand that as a Chinese historian works on PRC, and it is very important for you to look at archive there. I just feel like, at least for me, before returning the dissertation, without having a family, it is possible to spend 6 months and a year in the field. But after you get the job, after you have a family, it is just more challenging and more difficult. So, how did you manage the archive research part of your work?
That's a great question. Most of my archival work was done before my child was born. And this is another reason that I've had some late career success is because of the work that I put in as a graduate student. So when I was a graduate student, I spent a lot of time visiting archives, and I returned to the United States with suitcases full of archival documents that took me 10 years to go through. So a lot of the work I did earlier paid off. And the other thing I'll just say is that my family has been incredibly supportive of my research. So the last time I was in mainland China, 2015, I was able to do some research and some talks, and my wife and child did their own thing, and they kind of understood that Baba needs to go and be wandering scholar for a little. 2019, same kind of idea. So I guess if anything, this is the what I can say is that I tend to plan my research trips with the understanding that my wife and child need activities to do as well. So, for example, 2019, I did some research in Hong Kong. My wife and child went to Hong Kong Disneyland, So that's what you do. And I will note there is something of a sacrifice on my end because they're out there having amazing experiences and I want to take part of that. But sacrifices have to be made for the job, unfortunately. And I'll tell one random story. This will kind of maybe tie into some other things later. How hard I was working before I got tenure. I would regularly go to my office on the weekends to work because at a certain point, once my chair gave me that note, we're concerned about your third year review. I told my wife, I was like, we're no more traveling, right? I need to go work. And we go traveling all the time now. But for those years, it was very tough. And there was one weekend I was in the office grading papers. And I remember that because this year a lot of the papers were very low quality. And you could tell the students were padding them with just meaningless prose at the end. And I got a call, and it was my wife. And my wife said, "You're never going to believe what your son just did. I said, what happened? And she said, he just took his first steps. And I was so angry because I had missed that because I was in the office working. So this might foreshadow some stuff we'll talk about later, but as a junior faculty, it's very difficult because you have to 100% make some sacrifices to get tenure. So what I told my wife and my son along the way was that, okay, I am going to go to the office all spring break. But after I get tenure, you just tell me where you want to go and we'll go there. And ideally, if I can do some research too while you're doing some day trips, then everybody wins. But that's part of the sacrifices were made along.
So it sounds like it's a lot of investment of time and energy before tenure. So does it get better right now? What is your day-to-day basis like of a two-two teaching role plus writing? Like how do you work every day as a writer? And a
So
department chair, right? You're stepping down, but past 3 years, you were the department chair as well. So what is the
yes.
day-to-day life is like?
Well, these are kind of differing questions. So as chair, my day-to-day life is answering emails, signing PDF documents, approving expense reports. There's not a lot of writing that goes on. There's a little bit, but there's not a lot. So, I mean, in general, right now, I try to have a good life work balance. And this is something that I really try to emphasize with my colleagues is that if you have tenure, you do need to take a moment and reevaluate how you're balancing because almost certainly on the way to tenure you have to emphasize that work side probably too much. I mean, actually definitely too holistic perspective 100%. So for me, I do a lot of administrative work. I spend a lot of time with my family, especially with my son. I'm picking him up, driving to school every day. We have a rich life of inside jokes and laughter, and so that part is all very fulfilling. In terms of writing and writing habits, I'm going to generalize this a little bit because again, on a day-to-day basis, right now, it's difficult for me to get any work done. Sometimes but my writing style is very boring. There's nothing special about it. I delve into documents, I take very extensive notes, and then I write from the notes. It's not that original. If I have anything approaching a philosophy of writing, it's something that I believe was attributed to Mark Twain, and it goes something like this. It's that if your job is to eat one frog every day, then the first thing you should do in the morning is eat that frog. And if your job is to eat two frogs a day, then the first thing you should do is eat the bigger frog, which is to say, and this is partly my personality, is let me find the thing that I want to do the least, the most challenging, the most taxing part of the project, and let me focus on that first. And with the idea that things were going to get a little bit easier down the way. So for me, that's usually working with primary source documents because as someone who has worked a lot with archival materials, they're often very difficult. My last book had the most difficult documents I've ever worked with. They were handwritten by semi-literate authors, and it was really, really challenging. But that was the entry point is to just go after it. Um, in terms of what else I can say about my writing habits, I think if there is a secret to my success, it is that I do enjoy the process of editing. I really enjoy, and enjoy is a weird way to say it, but I think I do, to sit down with a draft chapter that I'm working on and just go over it and try to improve every sentence, every paragraph, and always thinking about my audience. This is something that I always emphasize is to write for an audience. You did ask if things got better as you progressed through the ranks. Let me try to answer that. The answer is yes and no. Yes, because there's a huge weight that was lifted off of my shoulders when I got tenure. And there was another weight that was lifted off my shoulders when I got full. Not having to go through review is very important to me. I don't want to be reviewed like that. just leave me alone. This is actually my biggest goal in academia life is if you could just leave me alone and I'll write and that I'll be happy. So there's that. The increased status on campus is very nice. People know who you are. They care about your opinion. These are all nice things. In terms of teaching, it's for me, it's gotten easier and easier because I've with every year of experience, it just gets that much easier. And I also have a really good sense of who my students are, and I enjoy my students. They're generally smart kids, but they come to Tulane because they also want to enjoy New Orleans and enjoy college, and I can fully appreciate that. I think they made a good choice. So that stuff gets easy. The increased administrative burdens are challenging. And I think, and again, right now you're talking to someone who spent 3 years as chair. And I didn't particularly enjoy it. I don't think it matches my personality very well. In some ways, I'm very good at it because I respond to emails and and hopefully this might be coming up in this conversation, but I like to accomplish things and solve problems so that I can move on and do the things I really want to do. So 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 on one hand, while I'm a good chair, I don't enjoy the being responsible but without any actual power. It's very challenging. So so that stuff it gets more and more difficult, I would say. But overall, I do believe that freedom that you get from tenure outweighs everything else. And I'll emphasize this right. I never would have gotten into academia if it wasn't for tenure. When people talk about getting rid of tenure, I don't think they understand really the implications of that. Because someone like me, when I was in college and I was considering my options, I understood that if I went into academia, that I would be severely limiting my income. That there's no getting rich in academia. That kind of at best you can live a middle class, if you get lucky, a slightly upper middle class lifestyle. To me, the freedom of tenure was very alluring. And not because I wanted to get tenure and stop working, and I hope that people who might be skeptical about that claim look at the publication record. I'm still working, but it was really important for me intellectually to have the freedom of tenure, and so that I think outweighs all the other things. So I think it truly does get better and better, but at the same time, the administrative stuff is a challenge.
But you are stepping down very soon, and it does get easier for research and for teaching. But speaking of not getting rich in academia, I'm just very curious. Did the three books that you published bring you any extra income?
Zero income. Well, not zero income, but it might have been zero. It might as well have been zero, I think is what the correct way to phrase that. Almost nothing. And this is something I completely misjudged when I was an undergraduate. I thought if you publish books, you must make money off them. And I've made hundreds of dollars. It's true. I've made hundreds of dollars. But in terms of the amount of energy that I've put into the books, it's completely nonsensical to write them, which is one of the reasons why it's actually is challenging to write that third book, right? The second book, you can see, all right, I write the second book, I'll get promoted to a full professor. That'll come with a pay raise. That makes sense. The third book and afterwards, there's almost no money. And instead, what do you have? Perhaps, you'll get some good reviews, but you also have people criticizing you, anonymously online. I've gotten a lot of criticism, and that is, if so whatever little money you get is completely outweighed by a lot of the negative things that happen when you put yourself out there with a creative piece of scholarship.
Then what keeps you going then if you're facing a lot of potential criticism? By the way, all I saw is very positive reviews of your third book, and I really enjoyed it. So what keeps you going then, even after being promoted to full?
So for me, there's specific things that drive each book, but I'll say two things that in general keep. The first is I do think that scholars, especially after you get tenure, need to cultivate a small and manageable ego. And do not become an egomaniac, please. We have enough of those in academia. But what I mean here is that everyone who gets tenure needs to get over their imposter syndrome. And I say this as someone who had crippling imposter syndrome for the first half of my career. This has a lot to do with my difficulty of getting into graduate school. When I started graduate school at UCLA, my entire funding package was $5,000, not per year. That was it. Just here's $5,000, and I had to go into debt. And I was looking around me, and all these other students had funding, and I just felt like, oh my God, I'm an imposter. And so for the first part of my career, I was always setting these goals of like, well, if I can just get a TA-ship and get funding, then I'll know that I made it. If I can just get a Fulbright fellowship, I'll know that I made it. If I can finish my dissertation, if I can get a tenure track job. And the goalposts kept moving, and I was always kind of looking towards some other external validation where I would feel that I had made it. And for me, I think when I got tenure, I was like, okay, it's probably time for me to stop feeling like an imposter. And instead, so my advice for scholars would be like, get over that and try to cultivate a small and manageable ego. And what I mean by that is that you should feel that your scholarship really important and needs to be out there. And if it's not out there in the world, then you are doing a disservice to the field, your students, your audience, the world, however you want to phrase it. But it's really important to kind of understand that if you don't publish this, nobody else is, and it'll never be known. And it's really your job to get it out there because what your research is unique and interesting and has to be out there. And the analogy would be to something like an artist, right? It's like, a painter paints the painting because they have something inside that they want to show the world. And so that is how I would suggest one way that myself and other people can think about things in terms of being productive. The other is to write for a specific audience. And I mean, writing is hard. So even if you were going to, write a letter, it takes effort. But if you're writing a letter to your child or your family member or your beloved mentor, that makes the writing meaningful immediately. So for me, my first book, I wrote it for specialists and my friends and colleagues. And since then, I've been writing more for my students and for undergraduate readers in general, and maybe general readers one day, we'll see. But the knowledge of, okay, when I write this book, I'm thinking of my students who are going to be reading this in class with me is very helpful. And one thing I do with all my work right now is I workshop it with my students. So I bring them in the process very early. And I'm very lucky that I have been blessed with a number of really great students who love history and have responded really well to some of my research. And there's a few feedbacks I've gotten that I can kind of think of in my mind right now, where it was like a student was like, this is amazing. This is exactly what I want to, the kind of history I want to read. And that kind of feedback really does push me to keep working. Whereas if I was just writing and not even knowing who might one day read this, that I think would be more challenging.
Well, speaking of bringing in students early in the research process, what are you working on right now?
I am working on a book that is kind of the opposite of my last book. So, Tiger Tyrant Bandit Business was a micro history. It was very, very tightly focused on counter revolution in one small corner of China over the course of 4 years, really 2 years, but if we're going to stretch it out over 4 years. And one of the things that I'm trying to do now that I do have tenure is to push myself out of my comfort zone, try to do different types of projects. So at Tulane, I teach all of Chinese history. So I want to write a book that covers all of Chinese history. And I'm a cultural historian, so I am attempting to write cultural history that spans 3,000 years of Chinese history that will be suitable for use in a college classroom, but would also be accessible to people who just have a general interest in history or Chinese history. It's a very challenging project, but it's one of these projects that I would not dare undertake if I didn't have tenure. But now that I have tenure, I have a little bit of freedom, and if I don't use that freedom, then I would be making I would just be wasting this opportunity, and I can't allow myself to do.
Is this comprehensive cultural history of China more for your ego or for the audience or for financial reason?
Not for financial reasons, because I've never seen any clue that anything I write would actually make me money in a meaningful way. So I'll say it's mostly I'm gonna say it's mostly for my students, just because I would love to have something for them that they can read and ask me questions. So one of the best things about assigning students, earlier I never assigned my own work to my own students because despite what I just said, my ego's maybe my ego's too frail that I don't want them to. It's too awkward, right? But what I discovered is that what I do now is I assign them my books, and then we just have a Q&A session. So I'm not asking them to discuss how brilliant the book is or how amazing the research is. It's more like, what don't you understand? What questions does this raise for you? So I think on one hand, um, it is my desire to have something for students that they'll enjoy reading and talking to me. But again, if I didn't have any ego, then I probably wouldn't want to write it at all. So I think if I'm being truly honest, there is that ego part of it of I want to try to do this and see if I can do it. Because if I can do it, that would be a fun story that I could tell people.
I'm excited to assign this book in my classroom, and I'm sure many of historians will. So it will definitely bring you some financial aspect, like financial benefits. I'm very sure. So, will you ever think that you will be done with writing in your career?
No, I don't think so because I actually do get joy out of it and I have fun with it. So, I mean, one thing I'll note is that, for example, in Tiger, Tyrant, Bad, and Businessman, there are inside jokes that are only for me. There are inside jokes that are for my friends, inside jokes that are for my students. And I try to have fun with these things. So, I mean, to go back to my second book, Land Wars, I initially thought that Stanford University Press would tell me, you cannot name this book Land Wars. Why would you name this book Land Wars? The name came to me as sort of a lark, and I thought it was a cool name for this book. Never thought that it would get published, but seeing it get published brings me a lot of happiness. So, I again, maybe this goes back to growing up in Hawaii. I have a playful approach to life and work, and so I get joy out of it. I maybe that's one takeaway for some of your listeners is that find the joy in your research and writing and lead in that direction.
If it's not in academia, have you ever thought about doing something different in your life?
Not in a long time. So when I was in college, I wanted to be a divorce lawyer. I thought I could definitely make a lot of money and buy a fancy sports car. But right now, and I'll add, when I was in graduate school, I struggled in graduate school. I think a lot of my peers suspected that I would not get my PhD. And I was very much seriously considering staying in Beijing, opening a small business, and seeing what happened. But for me, I would say teaching it can be so frustrating, but with the right students, if you have a great seminar, there's nothing like it. It's one of the best feelings in the world of having a great seminar. And, when students appreciate you and so we just had our end of the year party, and actually it was our award winning senior graduate who came up to me and she was telling me how much she learned about writing in my class, because that's one of the things I really focus on in class is writing. And I tell my students, we focus on this because I'm trying to become a better writer myself. So please bear with me. And she was telling me how much she appreciated that. And very interestingly, she's about to go to Hawaii where she's going to be in the Teach for America program. When I said goodbye to her, I said aloha. So I can't imagine doing anything else. I don't want to do anything else. But again, I would not have started down this path if I didn't know that tenure was an option.
Lots of people change their minds afterwards, but you definitely find the joy in what you do, and you're very good at it. So thank you, Dr. DeMare. A lot of very exciting plans. Before we end the conversation, what other things would you like us to know about you?
I thought that I should share with your listeners one of the best parts about being a I don't want I'm somewhere between a mid-career scholar and a senior scholar. I don't want to admit I'm a senior scholar yet, but one of the best parts about being at this stage of an academic career is meeting with younger scholars. I really enjoy going to conferences and meeting graduate students, recent PhDs who have read my work, who have been influenced by my work, but also me learning from them. And so much new research is coming out. And so I really appreciate reading the freshest of scholarship from my colleagues. And I'll add that there's a new book that's in the works about China and Hawaii by Un Lee that I'm very excited about reading as it develops. So that's what I would like now, or your listeners.
You're so kind. I need to cultivate my ego, and then I need to think about the audience. Who am I writing to? This is definitely like it's one of the best conversation. It is very, very assuring. I answer many of the questions that I have in mind. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm very excited about your new book of a comprehensive cultural history of China, and wish you all the best with future research projects, including your upcoming trip to Beijing. And then I hope you bring more suitcases of archival materials back, and then you can write for another 10 years. And hope you enjoy your life with your wife and son in China this summer as well. And hope to talk to you again soon, Dr. DeMare.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tenure, a Game Manual, make sure to check out our other episodes. Or if you just can't get enough of us, follow us on social media at Tenure, a Game Manual. This episode was produced by Sebastian Bancesco. Our executive producer and host is Dr. An Lee, and today's guest was Dr. Brian DeMare. Sebastian Bancesco is also our editor, and we are generously sponsored by the Dean of the Bass School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology, the Provost Teaching Fellow Program, and the AXH Grant. Thanks for listening. We've now reached our special segment where we ask everyday students, what's your favorite memory or experience with one of your professors? Today we hear from Philip, a business major at UT Dallas.
All right. So one professor who had a really big impact on me is someone who, on the surface, seems super professional and serious. I'm talking about my professor in marketing class, Professor Bigham. He's 91 years old. 91, can you believe it? And he's still teaching. He has apparently raised $1.9 billion to his company over like the course of his time there. And oh my god, I can't believe it. Like, he's the master. But he's also very kind. He's the kind of professor that you expect to just stick to the material and keep it moving. But once you get to like know him, you realize he's actually very funny and warm. He has this calm, grounded energy, but he still find a way to make us laugh here and there during class. Or sometimes he go off topic a lot, and yeah, we tend to like make him just go off topic a lot. What really stood out to me was how he's like genuinely care about his student. There was this one time when Theophilus was going through like a super tough week, and basically the whole vibe of the room was dead. Um, he paused the lecture and just give us like a free day to invited us to his country club to have breakfast. He bought us breakfast and everything, and it's just a day to relax. It's awesome. I love this class.